Hi friends, welcome back. This is lesson 3 of our sunflower project. You should be watching these videos in sequence so that you're following along with me as we do an oil pastel project in the style of the Dutch artist Vincent van Gogh. Now Vincent van Gogh did not have a great start to his early adult life. He didn't know what was going to happen. He tried his hand at being an art dealer in London, and that's what his brother did, and he really thought that's what he was supposed to do, but that wasn't working out. He tried to enter ministry, but couldn't get into the seminary because he kept failing the tests, and he worked as a pastor's assistant, and that wasn't fulfilling, and he tried to be a missionary to the miners in Brussels, and that wasn't working out. He was even a social worker for a little while. And so he really didn't know what was in store. But all through it, he kept on drawing until he finally realized, with some encouragement from his brother, that he should pursue the life of an artist. And so in 1880, he decided to do just that and enroll into an art school. Now the interesting thing is we learned that he loved to sketch and draw, and he did that for years. But the first time that Vincent van Gogh tried his hand at oil paints was in 1882. He was already 27 years old, and he fell in love with oil paints, how thick it was and rich and sumptuous to him, and the colors he could use. And so he loved that. But the sunflowers and the starry night that we saw earlier were evidence of his later years as a painter. When he first started off painting, he did all of his work in a very somber palette, lots of browns and greens and grays, kind of reflecting the life that was around him as he started to paint in Belgium around that peasant life. Take a look at this very early painting of Van Gogh called The Potato Eaters, quite a famous painting from 1885. These are hard-working peasants as they sit around a table to enjoy a very simple meal of potatoes. And notice the only light is coming from a lamp suspended from the ceiling, and that's the warm glow as this family, even though they have a very meager meal, just enjoys being together after a long day at work. Now this painting is very indicative of the types of painting that Van Gogh was doing very early on in his career. Peasant life, somber palette, really connecting to the people of the area that he loved so much. Like I said, he would give them the shirt off his back and often was a very meager means himself, and so would trade drawings just to get a meal. Now in 1886, Van Gogh decided to move to the center of the art world at that time, Paris, and his brother Theo was an art dealer in Paris, and that was one of the reasons he wanted to move there, to be close to his best friend brother Theo. Now, while he was in Paris at that time, that was the height of the Impressionist movement. And so he met all of the great artists, some names you probably know, like Monet and Pissarro and Renoir and Toulouse-Lautrec. And so they became his great friends. And so Van Gogh really learned from them. He looked at the way they painted. They used much brighter colors, much happier palette. Their strokes were different. And Seurat, which is another art project at See the Light, used pointillism, small dots and dashes of color. Well, this was a revelation of Van Gogh. He hadn't thought about painting like that before. And so the Impressionists greatly influenced Van Gogh, who is considered a post-Impressionist artist himself. Now we're going to continue with our project in the style of Van Gogh, and we're actually working in a style of the later Van Gogh, where he started to employ some of those techniques that he learned from the Impressionists, like small strokes of color that were unblended and a much happier, brighter palette. Look at this painting from 1886. This is where Van Gogh first started to change, and this is called Moulin de Bleu Fin. And it's a beautiful windmill in an area of Paris that was more agricultural than it was city life. And notice how it's brighter colors, and you can see more visible paint strokes, and it has a much lighter, airier feel than the Potato Eaters. Now in 1887, Van Gogh really got sick of city life. He missed the Netherlands where he was from, and even though he loved meeting those great Impressionist friends in Paris, he was just not a city guy. And so he decided to move to the south of France where it was more country. And he moved to a town called Arles. And in Arles, that's where suddenly he saw amazing blue skies and wheat fields and cypress trees, and colors took on a new meaning for him once he got to the clean air of the country. Sometimes we think we know something and we really don't, like Van Gogh. He thought he understood color as a painter. He'd been to art school. He even hung around the Impressionists. But he didn't really know color until he moved to Arles. And it was like his eyes were opened for the first time. You know, it reminds me of a passage in Scripture. It takes place at the time when Jesus had already died on the cross and was buried, and he had already risen. And he met up with two men who were traveling on a road, one of which we know is named Cleopas. And the men are traveling on the road, and Jesus is right there along beside them, but they don't recognize that it's Jesus. And he talks with them about Scripture and the fulfillment of Scripture. And it isn't till later. They're back because Cleopas and this man said to this stranger, because they didn't know it was Jesus, they said, why don't you come and have a meal with us? We want to talk with you some more. They were intrigued by this man. And it wasn't until they were together at the table. Well, let me read you that passage. It's in Luke. I love this. In Luke 24 it says, when he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And then he disappeared from their sight. And they asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the Scriptures to us? See, Jesus was right in front of them, and they didn't even know it. Their grief had consumed them so much, and we don't know why Jesus was hidden from their view. But all of a sudden, when Jesus recounted the Last Supper again for them by sharing bread, giving thanks, breaking it, and giving it to them, that suddenly their eyes were opened and they really saw who it was. Jesus, their Savior. Boy, I sure hope if Jesus comes here that I see him and recognize him. Wouldn't that be amazing to just be with Jesus and hear what he has to say and all the things that he can teach us to live to glorify God? I don't want to miss it if Jesus is right in front of me. But this story shows that sometimes things that might seem obvious aren't to us. It's not until some later time when our eyes are opened. And that's how it was for Van Gogh. Suddenly, when he was in Arles, color took on a new meaning, nature and beauty, and he was painting at a furious pace. He was sometimes churning out a painting a day. Isn't that incredible? And he worked and wouldn't sleep. Maybe catch an hour here and an hour there to sleep. He would paint through the night by lamplight, and he would go outside and paint some more. And so that time in Arles at the south of France was a really amazing time for Van Gogh to really explore what he wanted to do. And that's where the sunflower paintings were done, and that's where he really exploited this style of very thick applications of paint with rich color in short strokes. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're now at the next stage of our oil pastel drawing. Make sure you have a paper towel handy so that you can protect your drawing so far from smudging underneath your hand. I'm really excited about today, my friends, because this is a step that will really show a huge difference in the way this drawing is going to look. We're going to fill in the negative space. Now, positive space means the space that's taken up by the object or subject that you're drawing. So this is positive space. It's a sunflower, positive space, positive space. But this, all around it, is the negative space. And it's just as important in a drawing as the positive space. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill in the negative space for our background. So because this is all warm colors, we have orange and gold and yellow and red, I want to treat my background in the opposite, in a cool color. And so I'm going to go with light blue. You can pick purple if you'd like, or a darker blue, but I'm going to go with light blue as my background for my negative space. So I'm going to take my light blue pastel, and the first thing I'm going to do is, with short strokes, delineate a table versus a background. So come up a little bit from your vase bottom, so just a little bit up, and with some short strokes, create a table line like that. So then everything above that will be my background in blue, and below that will be my table. So I'm going to use the same application of pastel, press hard with some short strokes, not blending the color, and I'm going to fill in. Start around the urn first. Go as close to this side here, and by pressing up against it, I kind of create that nice line of the side of the urn where the two colors meet, creates a line. Go all the way up here. I'm not going to worry around the sunflowers for now. Right now I'm just kind of working horizontal strokes of this light blue. I'm not going to go all the way out to the edge. And they don't have to all be the same length or thickness, because that's not how it would be if we were working with paint. About like that. And now I'm going to do the same thing on this other side of the urn. Start from the urn edge so I can try and get up nice and close to it, create almost a line. But when you add into that negative space, my friends, that really makes the composition of what you're trying to show, like the urn, really pop out. And you can see how I'm not going all the way to the edges. I'm just up close against the subject matter. It can be an uneven shape you're creating. Now when you get near the flowers, this is where you have to be a little more careful, but boy will this make a huge difference. That yellow will really pop when you have this blue up against it. So I'm protecting my drawing from smudging, and now I'm going to just go a little slower, a little more carefully as I go around with my light blue pastel around the leaves and try and get in all those little negative spaces around each petal. See how that yellow now just pops with that blue going right up against it? I can really make that shape show. So take your time, keep your strokes horizontal. Even if you're going around the edge, don't change the direction of your stroke just because you're moving around the object. Keep them all going in that direction. You might have to make the stroke smaller, almost like a dot. That's fine. And I can see there's some space between these two. I'm going to put in a little bit blue there. Move my paper towel up so I don't smudge. Look at how that yellow really comes out once you fill in that negative space. So it'll take you some time. If you want and you need more time, you can always pause the DVD and work on your background negative space, whatever your background color is, and then come back. Well, I'm going to fill in and work around. I'm not going to go to the very top of my paper. I'm just going to work around my composition, being careful with my strokes. Like that. See, now I'm at the point where I need to peel off a little bit of my paper, which is always fine. Try and keep some paper on. It'll keep your hands cleaner. See? So like that. That's good. And see, here there's negative space because the height of the sunflowers varies, which is always great for composition. Some low, some high. So I put in these little strokes. I'm still keeping my strokes horizontal. They're all going in the same direction. Even though there might be a different length or a different thickness, that's okay, but keep them in the same direction. And this is where I can cover up any of those original gray drawing lines that I drew when I was planing out my composition. See, it's starting to really come to life, my friends, by adding this step in. If your pastel gets dirty, just clean it off before you move on. Try and get as close to the petals as you can so that you make them really stand out. Take a look, decide if it feels balanced enough for you, or if you need to add a little more. I think I want to add a little more down here on this side. Now, with any other part of our oil pastel project, this is just the first layer, but this is our base background color, and I think it really stands out nicely against the beautiful gold of those sunflowers. Now we're going to do the same thing with the table surface area. Clean off my light blue, put that back. I'm not sure, I'm going to say it's kind of wood, maybe wood-like. I know that's what Van Gogh did in a couple of his compositions. You were never really sure what the table surface was, but it was kind of like wood. And he would do the same technique of a lot of strokes of different colors where optically you would mix them to be a color, but he didn't do any mixing. He used individual strokes of color. So let's do the same thing. We'll start off with this tan, goldish tan color, because that is a nice contrast to this blue. And this will be our table surface, so right up against the urn, short strokes, and right up to that line we kind of created with the light blue. Again, you don't go all the way to the edge. But as close as you can to the urn. Great. I don't think I got anything on there. No, good shape. So if you look at this sunflower painting, you'll see that he used the same color palette for his surface as he did for his main composition. It was kind of a way he decided to unify the whole thing. And this very pale, it's actually a very pale green, hard to tell, very, very pale green background, and a very pale tan bottom to the vase. That was really only the color variation. Everything else is within the same family. There's another painting by Van Gogh where the table, you can see multiple strokes of a lot of different shades of brown and tan, and that's what we're going to be doing here. So while we're still in this table section, grab a brown that you have, and we're going to add in every here and there some strokes right over the gold, just every here and there. But on this left side, since we've already determined earlier when we were looking at the light source for our flowers that the light was coming from the right, so since we've already determined the light is coming into the right, it is going to be darker to the left. On the bottom here on this table surface, put in even more strokes of brown right against the vase on this left-hand side, under it and to the side of it, like so. Only a few over here, but much more over on the left. And then clean off your pastel. And now let's take this mossy green, and we're going to do the same thing. Add in some strokes every here and there. Over this side too, but this is much further apart. And on this left side, since this is the shady side, we're going to add in more strokes right up against the urn. We're ready for another layer on our actual urn too. See, it's not just enough to stay within the same color family. One of the great things about exploring color in art is when you start to play around with the addition of other colors. And so what artists would do, especially the Impressionists, they didn't want to ever show shade or shadow by adding in black. It was too harsh, too strong. So they would always look to the color wheel and say, what is the opposite on the color wheel that I can add to create some shadow? So the opposite of red on the color wheel is green. So take your green pastel. I have a small piece, so I'm going to use that. So my green pastel. And just on this left side, I'm going to add in some strokes of green right on top of the red. I'm staying with the horizontal strokes because that kind of helps create that natural form of the urn. And I'm going to concentrate this green mostly on the left. But now I'm going to do just a little bit on the right because it's a form that moves around, which means there's value changes all the way around. So adding in just a few little strokes all the way to the bottom. Now, where the straight sides of the urn then meet where it slopes, that's the neck. Okay. I do want to put some in the neck area as well. And you see this part of the urn that flares out to the very top? That's actually in much more shadow because those flowers are hanging over it. So in that part, I have to remember to add in some green because that's, and even more green because that's even more shadow. So that flared out top part of the neck, I'm going to add in green strokes, clean off my pastel. And now I'm going to move to add in some purple. So you should have a dark purple in your set. Shadows are always cool colors. Even if it's a warm vase, the shadow would be cool. And so because it's an absence of a lot of light, whereas when things are in highlight, it's a warm color. So I'm going to add in, just at the very edge, some dark purple strokes. And this is what the Impressionists would do, my friends. They wouldn't try and blend to get a color. They say, well, what would happen if I were to put all these colors next to each other? What would my eye do? And if you did our pointillism fruit lesson that we did on Syrah, that's what we learned about, optical mixing. And you can already see how some form is being developed here, where it looks like it's a 3D object because of where we're creating these darker values. Now when I look at this, I can see that the lighter area is a little too wide for me. I think it should be a little narrower. So I'm going to go back to my red, and I'm going to lay in, I'm going to leave a little area to the right here untouched, but I'm going to lay in some more red, like this. Now can you see how this is kind of a warm browny kind of red? So I'm going to take my, it's kind of like a rusty brown. We used it, I think we used it earlier. I'm going to add in some of that over the whole thing. I'm keeping my strokes horizontal. I don't want to lose that. Perfect. I love how we filled in that negative space. It really makes those sunflowers pop out, doesn't it? Anytime you see that there's like a red vase against a table, a little bit of that red will reflect onto the table. Anytime you have objects that are very close together and there is a light source, some of the color goes onto the other surface. So that same rusty red brown, I'm going to put some strokes of that because some of that red will reflect right on that table and underneath as well. Get those extra flakes off of there. There we go. You want to be careful not to brush with your hand because then you would smear pastel across your whole drawing. If you have big chunks of pastel that came off when you were applying your strokes and you don't want them there, you're going to have to kind of pick them off very gingerly. Don't try to brush them away. That will not work. Okay? Van Gogh painted 14 different paintings, all about sunflowers. Most of them have the title Sunflowers, Sunflowers with 12, Sunflowers with 14, something like that. He loved sunflowers. Now, why did he do that? Well, one of the reasons was he had his studio in Arles that he called the Yellow House. And he invited his friend, Paul Gauguin, who was an Impressionist artist he had met in Paris, to come be his roommate for a while and paint and live there. And he was very excited that Paul Gauguin said yes, that he would be his roommate for a while. And so before Paul came down, he wanted to brighten up his room. So he painted a bunch of sunflower paintings to fill his friend's room. What a lovely gift that was. And because it was called the Yellow House, and he loved that color yellow, he decided to make all the paintings sunflowers. You know, I would love to have one of Van Gogh's sunflower paintings, but I'd have to have an awful lot of money, because even though he only sold one painting while he was alive, one, after he died, all the rest of his artwork became very famous. In fact, in 1987, one of his Van Gogh sunflowers became the most expensive painting that had been sold to that time. $39 million for one Van Gogh sunflower painting. Isn't that incredible? And he was worried he wasn't going to have any type of legacy. And he was one of the most famous artists. Okay, so we're not quite finished with our sunflower yet. We still have to add in our darkest shadows and our brightest highlights, which we're going to do the next time we're together as we finish up lesson 4 of our oil pastel sunflowers in the style of Van Gogh. See you then.